Confucianism or Taoism, and some places with Christianity, you will still find people who are still using ancient methods of copying onto fresh paper with fresh ink to keep their holy books alive.
Those called monasteries.
Sometimes, like in the New Testament era, once the New Testament began to be copied, they used a room. It was a standalone building. Then they called it a scriptorium. So people didn't live there like they live at a monastery, but that was the place they went to work. They went to the scriptorium, and all they did was copy the New Testament books over and over and over for their lifetime. Yes?
How did the Dead Sea Scrolls play into that? They written by the Essenes, or were they written?
Many were
Scribes?
copied. Many were copied, by the Essenes, but then most of the Dead Sea Scrolls are scrolls related to rules and ideas that governed the Qumran community itself. And they were kind of the most esoteric, the most mystical of all the Essene groups that we've at least discovered till now. Does that help?
So they were written by the Essenes?
Yeah, assuming that the Qumran community really is Essene, like we think it is.
Okay.
There's some debate now. There's a couple of liberal scholars that are trying to say the Qumran community wasn't an Essene community, but so far their arguments are falling flat on their face. I just wanted to throw that out there, so if you go Googling it, if it piques your interest, you might see that there is some pushback on that idea, but the vast majority of scholars think that they were Essenes.
So what are the Dead Sea Scrolls? Are they not copies of the Bible?
Some are, yes. Dead Sea Scrolls means the scrolls they found in the Qumran community, which is in cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea, right? And so every Old Testament book except the book of Esther is represented there. Esther is the only book that doesn't have even a fragment of it found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But then there's also thousands of other scrolls that are related to everything from food storage lists, assignments for duties within the community, rules that govern how the community operates, like their constitution, if you will. There's thousands of other things in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in addition to those 38 books of the Old Testament that are there.
So it's like if they sent everything, including their religious principles, in a time capsule and left it there.
Yes, that's right.
Like, it's like, this is our community and culture.
That's how we know
20,000
that.
years from now.
That's how
it's
we
still there.
know that they made people go through immersion baptism to become a part of the community. And that was only after 3 years of extremely rigorous spiritual and physical testing of the candidate that wanted to join. Like, they took church membership to a whole new level, right? Because they really were like a church before there was the idea of church. They were a purely spiritual community. That was what they were. They weren't looking to make an impact on the nation of Israel at all. They were looking to live the most pure life they could possibly live so that they could receive the most pure rewards from God in the next life.
It wasn't about saving the world, it was about.
It was not evangelistic at all. Not at all. It was very reclusivistic. Very reclusivistic.
So if you wanted to be a part of this community, you would have to find this community and then, like.
Yeah, and I mean,
everybody.
everybody knew where it was. They just, where they were, that region we call Qumran. Kerbit is the word that goes with it now. That region is extremely rugged. I mean, you're talking sheer cliff faces and box canyons and then tiny canyons that go out into actual open spaces, and it's like a geographical maze. So pretty much everybody knew that Qumran was a thing, but they could easily defend it from anything that wasn't just a full-blown army. They could easily defend it and keep gatekeepers there so the outsiders didn't just come walking in.
That's what I was gonna ask, is like, because you would think that if they weren't protected by this, that it would have been an easy target to eradicate.
Absolutely. And it ended up being a very easy target for the Roman army. When Rome decided to march on it, there was no chance. I mean, it was just over, for sure.
They wiped it.
They did wipe them out. So we got to read some Bible. We haven't gotten to Bible yet, and we're almost out of time.
But
Are
some
we
did
out of time?
scatter,
We have
right?
6 minutes, huh?
Some did scatter.
Well, sure. But I mean, I'm not saying they annihilated every human life, but
Right,
they.
no, I
the
mean,
whole
that's
culture.
important to recognize that that's how some of the culture was preserved, it just wasn't ever together.
Kind of,
like that, right?
but I'll tell you this, Amanda, they had been lost to history, and not until 1947, when a little shepherd boy threw a rock up into a cave mouth. He had goats out there, and he's just playing. The goats are eating. He throws a rock up into this one cave and hears pottery shatter. So he climbs this cliff face with no rappelling gear, climbs this cliff face, goes up there. There's all these earthen vessels in this cave, and thank God he didn't touch any of them. He went and got his daddy. And his daddy called the Israeli Antiquities Authority, and they sent people out, and all those scrolls, for the most part anyway, they got captured by the right people that could take care of them and preserve them. You know, we didn't have a shepherd boy using them as toilet paper out in the desert, you know, because that could have happened with a small, I mean, I think he was 9 years old. And
There must have been someone,
and so that's how it was discovered. And it was like, who were these people? Why were they here? What was up? And then as they start getting able to unroll all these scrolls that have been just rolled up in jars for 2,000 years, thank God we have the ability to like start to rehydrate things now and whatnot and spread those scrolls out and be able to read them. That's how we know anything about that community, is their own self-testimony. It's not like there's outside sources about them at all. Yeah. So, Matthew 23. Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples. The scribes and the Pharisees are seated in the chair of Moses. Therefore, do whatever they tell you and observe it, but don't do what they do, because they don't practice what they teach. They tie up heavy loads that are hard to carry and put them on people's shoulders, but they themselves aren't willing to lift a finger to move them. They do everything to be observed by others. They enlarge their phylacteries and lengthen their tassels. They love the place of honor at banquets, the front seats in the synagogues, greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called rabbi by people. Can you just hear the sarcasm in Jesus' voice? But as for you, do not be called rabbi, because you have one teacher and you're all brothers. Do not call anyone on earth your father, because you have one Father who's in heaven. And do not be called masters either, because you have one master, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Do you hear how Christ is driving at the very heart of the Pharisees' ideology and the Sadducees' ideologies without calling the Sadducees even by name? Probably because there were no Sadducees present, because we don't see the Sadducees chasing Jesus around the countryside the same way we see the Pharisees. The Sadducees stayed in Jerusalem near the temple doing their aristocratic business. They weren't going to go sweat with the commoners in the dirt, right? So verse 13, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You lock up the kingdom of heaven from people, for you don't go in, and you don't allow those trying to enter to go in. That's pretty terrifying, huh? Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You devour widows' houses and make long prayers just for show. This is why you will receive a harsher punishment. Well, of course, the Sadducees are utterly going to ignore that, because they're like, there's no afterlife anyway, right? But the Pharisees that are there, they hear in this a threat of a terrible punishment in the next life. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to make one convert, And when he becomes one, you make him twice as fit for hell as you are. Woe to you, blind guides. By the way, when he talks to the blind guides, he's shifting focus a little bit and making sure the scribes understand that he's talking to them, because they would have been called in by the Pharisees to help guide them on coming up with a rule, right? Woe to you, blind guides, who say whoever takes an oath by the sanctuary, it means nothing, but whoever takes an oath by the gold of the sanctuary is bound by his oath. You blind fools, for which is greater, the gold or the sanctuary that sanctifies the gold? Also, whoever takes an oath by the altar, it means nothing, but whoever takes an oath by the gift that is on the altar is bound by his oath. You blind people, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift? Therefore, the one who takes an oath by the altar takes an oath by it and by everything on it. The one who takes an oath by the sanctuary takes an oath by it and by him who dwells in it. And the one who takes an oath by heaven takes an oath by God's throne and by him who sits on. Jesus is driving at some of the hotly debated theological things going on. Debates between the Pharisees and the Sadducees actually at this time. And so Jesus is just hammering them for majoring on the minors, if you will, and then getting it wrong. Making a mountain out of a molehill and then finding out that it's actually fire ants in that thing. You know, kind of a deal. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You pay a tenth of mint, dill, and cumin, yet you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. These things should have been done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat, yet gulp down a camel. We got to stop because we're out of time. Y'all read the rest of that chapter, though. And with that sort of this is the religious environment that Jesus starts his ministry in, that'll help you as we move through the rest of this, as I'm drawing things out of the Gospels. It'll help establish kind of a baseline for why Jesus seems like he's picking a fight sometimes. Because hint, hint, my personal read of all four Gospels is that Jesus absolutely made sure that those religious leaders were going to kill him one day. He absolutely picked a fight for 3 years. And he's the one that kept up in the ante. He's the one that kept getting more and more confrontational with them until they finally blew a gasket. I'm serious. And as we move through it, my goal is to help you see that, because Jesus had made it very clear from early on he was going to die, he was going to be raised, right? He had made the crucifixion and the resurrection clear, and he had also said over and over, no one takes my life, but I lay it down willingly. And we see that he almost had to make them do it. And he just made sure that at the end of Passion Week, at the end of the Passover, at the perfect time with the perfect imagery around his ministry, he made sure he died at the exact right date in history for it to happen. All right, we got to pray and be dismissed. Rex, will you voice our closing prayer?
Lord, thank you for this day and allow us to come here, learn, and listen to your word, and Brother Chaz, he brings knowledge to us during the sermon. And be with all the prayer requests that we mentioned earlier today, and be with us throughout the rest of the day. In Jesus' name.
Amen. Blessings on your houses.